She woke up before the alarm, as she often did. The room was still dark, and the city outside her small window had not fully started breathing yet. She lay still for a moment, listening to the soft hum of distant traffic and the quiet ticking of an old wall clock. Another long day was waiting for her. She already felt tired before it even began. Her apartment was small, barely enough space to move freely, but it was clean. A narrow bed stood near the window. A simple table held a chipped mug, a few old books, and a stack of unpaid bills. In the corner, covered with a thin cloth, stood her most precious belonging, worn piano. Some keys were scratched, and a few made a dull sound, but to her, it was perfect. She got up, washed her face, and tied her hair back the way she always did. There was nothing special about her routine. She dressed in simple clothes, slipped on her shoes, and took one last look at the piano before leaving. She did this every morning, as if silently promising it she would return. The restaurant where she worked was nothing like her apartment. It was large, bright, and elegant. Tall glass windows, polished floors, and soft music playing in the background. It was a place where powerful people came to relax, make deals, and show their status. She had worked there for years, long enough to know which guests liked their coffee strong and which demanded everything perfect. As soon as she put on her apron, she became invisible. That was how it felt to her. Guests rarely looked at her face. They spoke quickly, sometimes rudely, as if she were part of the furniture. She learned to smile, nod, and move fast. She learned to swallow words and hide feelings. Tips depended on silence, not honesty. Still, she observed everything. She noticed how people laughed loudly at things that were not funny. She noticed how confidence came easily to those with money. She noticed how talent was often ignored if it came from the wrong place. During breaks, she stood near the back door and took deep breaths of fresh air. Sometimes she tapped invisible keys on her leg, imagining melodies in her head. Music never left her. Even when she was carrying heavy trays or cleaning tables, her love for the piano started when she was young. Back then, life was harder, but dreams felt closer. There was an old piano in a community hall, and she would sneak in after school to play. No teacher, no lessons, just her and the sound. She learned by listening, by feeling, by repeating until her fingers hurt. Music became her language when words failed. But life moved on, and dreams were pushed aside. Bills needed to be paid. Work had to be done. The piano stayed, but the world around her told her that talent alone was not enough. So she played at night, quietly, carefully, as if afraid to disturb the life she was supposed to accept. At the restaurant, there was a grand piano near the center of the room. It was glossy and beautiful, always clean, always locked. It was there for special nights, for famous players hired at high cost. Every time she passed it, her heart tightened. She never touched it. She never dared. One evening, as she served a group of well-dressed guests, she overheard them talking about music. They spoke about concerts they had attended, about famous performers, about art, as if it belonged only to them. She listened silently, placing plates on the table, refilling glasses. One guest noticed her pause for just a second too long. "Do you like music?" the guest asked, half smiling, half mocking. She froze, then nodded politely. "Yes," she said softly. "What do you play?" Another voice asked, clearly amused. She hesitated. Saying the truth felt dangerous, but lying felt worse. "The piano," she replied. There was a short laugh at the table. Not cruel, but dismissive. The kind of laugh that says, "That's cute, not serious." She felt her face grow warm. She lowered her eyes and excused herself. The rest of the shift passed slowly. Every sound felt louder. Every step felt heavier. Later that night, when she returned home, she didn't turn on the lights. She sat at the piano in the dark and let her fingers rest on the keys. She played softly at first, then stronger. The music carried everything she could in. Months had passed since her breakthrough performance, and her life had begun to settle into a new rhythm, one that balanced work at the restaurant, practice, and performances. She still loved the quiet moments at her piano in her apartment. But now, those moments carried the excitement of new possibilities. She could feel her life expanding in ways she had never imagined. Every morning she woke with a sense of purpose. Her day began with breakfast and a glance at the piano, followed by the routine tasks that had once seemed mundane but now felt comforting. She moved through the familiar streets, recognizing the small details of her neighborhood, noticing how life continued in its ordinary pace. Even as hers had begun to change dramatically, opportunities continued to arrive. Invitations to perform at community events, small concerts, and private gatherings became frequent. Each event carried a new challenge, a different audience, new expectations, and the need to bring her best performance every time. She welcomed these challenges, knowing that each note she played and each performance she gave was not just about skill, but about connection and storytelling. She remembered her first major performance at the restaurant and the nervous anticipation that had filled her. Now, that fear had transformed into excitement. Her fingers danced over the keys with confidence, and her mind was calm yet alert. Each piece she played was carefully chosen, sometimes her own composition, yes, sometimes a classic that allowed her to express emotion freely. The audience responded not just to technical skill, but to the heart she put into every note. Her growing recognition brought new experiences. People began to approach her with questions about her journey, seeking advice and encouragement. Young musicians were inspired by her story, seeing in her a model of perseverance and courage. She spoke to them with warmth and humility, sharing her struggles and triumphs, always emphasizing that practice, patience, and self-belief were key. Her words carried weight because they were grounded in real experience, not theory. Amid the opportunities and attention, she also faced new challenges. Not every performance went perfectly. Some audiences were critical, others inattentive. She learned to accept mistakes without letting them shake her confidence. Each setback became a lesson, each difficult crowd an opportunity to grow stronger. Over time, she realized that success was not measured by perfection alone, but by persistence, passion, and the ability to inspire. As she traveled to different venues, she noticed the variety of ways people experienced music. Some closed their eyes and let the melodies carry them. Others whispered comments to friends, and some simply watched in quiet admiration. She discovered that music had a universal language, connecting people of different ages, cultures, and backgrounds. Each performance was a chance to touch someone's heart, to make a moment memorable, and to share a piece of herself. The local media began to take notice. Articles appeared highlighting her journey from a quiet waitress to a talented pianist whose music moved audiences. She was invited to interviews and radio shows, each time sharing her story with the same humility and passion. While the attention was flattering, she remained focused on the music. Knowing that it was the heart of her story, not the headlines, her performances began to include collaborations with other musicians. She met violinists, cellists, and vocalists, who shared her love for expression through sound. Working with others brought new insights and joy, as she learned to adapt, listen, and complement different instruments and styles. These experiences enriched her own music, bringing depth and nuance to her performances that audiences appreciated. Through it all, she remained connected to her roots. She continued to work part-time at the restaurant, valuing the familiarity and community it offered. Colleagues and customers alike treated her with renewed respect, but she never let the recognition inflate her ego. She understood the value of humility and the importance of staying grounded, even as her life transformed. She also dedicated time to teaching. Small groups of aspiring musicians came to her apartment to learn piano. She guided them patiently, sharing her techniques, her favorite pieces, and most importantly, her philosophy of music as an emotional journey. Watching their progress brought her joy, and she found fulfillment in helping others discover the same sense of freedom and expression that music had given her. As the months turned into a year, her reputation grew beyond her city. Invitations arrived to perform at larger venues, cultural events, and festivals. She felt the excitement and pressure of each new stage, but also the satisfaction of realizing her potential. She had gone from being overlooked and underestimated to becoming a respected musician whose talent resonated with many. Yet even with the success, she never forgot the quiet moments alone at her piano. Those moments reminded her why she played in the first place: the joy of creation, the ability to express emotion, and the personal connection to each melody. She realized that recognition and opportunity were wonderful, but the true essence of her music came from within, from the passion and dedication she nurtured daily. Her life had changed, but so had she. Confidence now walked beside her wherever she went, and courage had become a habit rather than a rare visitor. She had learned that taking risks, trusting herself, and embracing vulnerability could lead to extraordinary moments. The world, she realized, could be surprising and generous to those who dared to act on their dreams. Friends and family were amazed at the transformation. People who had once thought of her only as a quiet, hard-working waitress now saw her as an accomplished, inspiring musician. Yet she remained approachable, humble, and kind. She valued the connections she had built, understanding that relationships, support, and encouragement were just as important as talent. Opportunities continued to expand. She began to write more original pieces, exploring themes of life, struggle, hope, and human emotion. Each composition told a story, often inspired by her own journey from obscurity to recognition. Audiences connected deeply to her music, seeing their own experiences reflected in the melodies, harmonies, and rhythm she created. She traveled to different cities, performing in small theaters, cultural centers, and community gatherings. Every performance taught her something new about music, about people, and about herself. She discovered the joy of improvisation, the power of silence between notes, and the way a single melody could evoke memories and feelings she could never have anticipated. Through it all, she remembered the first night at the restaurant. When her performance had shocked and moved the guests, that night had been the turning point, the catalyst for everything that followed. She often reflected on how one brave step, taken despite doubt and fear, had opened a world of possibilities. It reminded her that courage, even in the face of uncertainty, could change a life. As she settled into this new chapter, she felt a quiet contentment. Her journey was ongoing, filled with challenges, growth, and joy. The music had given her not only recognition but a sense of purpose, a way to connect with others, and a life enriched by expression and creativity. She understood that her story was still being written, and that each note she played contributed to a future that was now full of hope, possibility, and the freedom to dream even bigger. Dash the tiredness, the quiet anger, the hope she tried to ignore. She wasn't playing to be famous. She wasn't playing to impress anyone. She played because it reminded her who she was. Days passed. Shifts blurred together. But something had changed inside her. The laughter she had heard stayed with her, not as pain, but as a challenge. She started practicing longer. She pushed herself harder. Mistakes no longer scared her. At the restaurant, an important event was coming up. The staff talked about it non-stop. Important guests, media attention. Everything had to be perfect. A famous pianist was scheduled to perform that night. She listened quietly, carrying plates, wiping tables, hiding her thoughts. The grand piano sat waiting, shining under the lights. She walked past it again and again, her reflection moving across its surface. She had no idea that this event would change her life. For now, she was still just a waitress. Still unnoticed, still underestimated, but deep inside, the music was ready, and it was waiting for the right moment to be heard. The morning of the big event arrived quietly, as if the city itself knew something important was about to happen. She woke up with a mixture of excitement and nervousness, though she tried not to think about it too much. Her routine was the same: quick breakfast, a glance at the old piano in the corner, and a deep breath before leaving. Today, however, every step toward the restaurant felt heavier and lighter at the same time, weighed with anticipation, yet light with the hope of something different. When she arrived, the restaurant was already bustling. Staff hurried from table to table, checking glasses, arranging chairs, and polishing silverware until it shined. The air smelled of fresh flowers and the faint scent of cooked food, a mixture she had grown used to, but which still made her stomach twist in both excitement and anxiety. She put on her apron and started her shift. At first, the usual routine took over, refilling drinks, carrying plates, responding to requests. But today, something was different. The energy of the room, the way guests moved and looked around, created a tension that could be felt even from the kitchen. People were here not just for dinner, but for experience. They were here to be impressed. Some guests arrived early, chatting in low voices, sipping champagne, and scanning the room. They were dressed in elegant clothes and wore expressions of judgment, the kind that seemed to weigh everyone around them. She moved past them quietly, keeping her head down, pretending to be invisible while listening to their conversations. They spoke about famous artists, important events, and rare experiences. Every word reminded her how small her world had seemed, how invisible her talent had been, and how easily people judged before they knew. During the lunch rush, she noticed a young man standing by the piano. Adjusting the microphone and checking the music sheets, he looked professional and serious, the kind of person who belonged there, someone who belonged in that world. She kept working, glancing occasionally, letting her fingers trace the outlines of the tray she carried, imagining her hands on the piano keys instead. The sound in her mind was rich, full, and powerful, though her real fingers were stiff from holding plates and napkins all day, as the afternoon sun poured through the windows. She observed more of the guests. Some were laughing loudly at jokes that seemed unfunny. Others whispered with subtle contempt toward anyone they thought beneath them. She had learned long ago that appearances could be deceiving, that people's true characters were rarely revealed in polite conversation. She kept this in mind as she moved from table to table, offering smiles and nods, keeping her thoughts carefully hidden around mid-afternoon. A small group gathered near the piano, talking about the event later that evening. They were curious, skeptical, and perhaps a little bored. The scheduled pianist was a famous name, but the conversation suggested some doubt. They laughed lightly, making small jokes about talent and who deserved to be there. It was casual, but she could hear the tone of disbelief. Some of the comments stung, though they were not meant for her. They were meant for anyone who dared to dream outside their expected role. She paused for a moment near the back, holding a tray of glasses, and allowed herself to listen. Her heart beat faster, not just from the work, but from the recognition of opportunity. Deep down, she knew she could play like no one expected. She could make the piano sing, tell a story, and move hearts. But the thought of trying in front of these people, these elite, judgmental eyes, made her stomach twist. One of her coworkers, a kind, older woman who had worked there for many years, noticed her lingering. "You're thinking about it, aren't you?" she asked softly. She nodded, unsure of what to say. The older woman smiled, her eyes warm and understanding. "I know you can do it. Don't let their laughter stop you. They don't know what you're capable of. But you do." Her words hung in the air, a quiet encouragement. It was more than advice. It was a reminder that someone believed in her when no one else had. She swallowed hard and continued her shift, the words repeating in her mind as she moved through the crowded room, delivering dishes, refilling drinks, and managing small accidents with calm efficiency. As the day progressed, the tension grew. Staff were briefed repeatedly, instructions repeated, tables inspected. The guests arrived in waves, each arrival more glamorous than the last. She observed them with careful eyes, noting the expressions, the gestures, the way they assumed everyone was there to serve them. She felt a quiet determination grow inside her, stronger than the nervousness that had dominated the morning. Around late afternoon, a small problem arose. The scheduled pianist was delayed, caught in traffic, and might not arrive for the evening performance. The staff whispered in concern, the manager pacing quietly. She overheard the conversations while setting up drinks and felt a strange mix of fear and hope. Her hands tightened around the tray, and she told herself to stay calm. When the manager finally looked at her, his expression hinted at both panic and curiosity. "If we don't have someone for the piano tonight, what do we do?" he muttered under his breath. He didn't look at her, but she felt her heart leap. A chance, perhaps impossible, had quietly appeared. She didn't speak, afraid to reveal her thoughts too soon, but she felt the pull of possibility. This could be the moment she had waited for, the moment to step out from the shadows. The evening began with soft lighting, guests taking their seats, servers moving silently among them. The restaurant was alive, but the piano waited, silent and gleaming. She moved past it constantly, each time feeling the pull of her own music, the desire to be heard. The laughter from earlier, the doubts, the skepticism, they all merged into a quiet challenge, daring her to take a step forward. By the time the room filled, she could no longer ignore it. Something inside her shifted. The fear was still there, but it was joined by a stronger force, determination. She remembered the hours spent at home, practicing, perfecting, feeling the music in her soul when no one was around. Those private moments had built a courage she didn't yet fully understand. Her coworker came by one last time, offering a nod and a gentle smile. No words were needed. She understood. It was time to decide. She walked toward the piano, her steps careful but steady. Every eye was not on her yet, but soon they would be. Her heart pounded in her chest, her palms slightly sweaty, her fingers itching to play. For the first time in years, the world felt like it was holding its breath, waiting for what was about to happen. She sat down, feeling the cool keys beneath her fingers. She hesitated for a brief moment, letting the quiet of the room settle around her. The guests were chatting softly, unaware of the storm that was about to break. She closed her eyes, took a deep breath, and let herself remember every note she had practiced, every melody that had carried her through loneliness, exhaustion, and doubt. This was no longer a rehearsal in a small apartment. This was real, and she was ready. The music was hers, but the world was about to hear it. And for the first time, she felt the possibility of being more than invisible, more than a shadow in someone else's world. The room was buzzing quietly, filled with soft conversations, clinking glasses, and the occasional laughter. She could feel every eye in the restaurant, though no one had noticed her approaching yet. She adjusted her position on the piano bench, letting her fingers hover over the keys. Each note seemed to call to her, whispering that this was the moment she had waited for all her life. Her hands trembled slightly, but it was not fear alone. It was the weight of opportunity, of a lifetime of unseen effort, of dreams held in silence. She remembered the nights spent in her tiny apartment, when the world had been asleep and only the music had kept her alive. She let those memories fill her, giving her courage. The guests continued talking, unaware of the story unfolding right beside them. A few servers moved past her, carrying trays, careful not to draw attention to what was happening. She drew a deep breath and let her fingers press down on the first key. The sound was soft, almost hesitant, but it felt perfect. She repeated it, and the notes began to grow stronger, clearer, carrying a gentle energy that seemed to make the room pause, even if only for a second. At first, only a few heads turned. People were curious, not yet fully aware that something extraordinary was happening. But as she continued, the melody became richer, more confident. The music filled the space, weaving between the murmurs of conversation, reaching the ears and hearts of those who were willing to listen. A few guests stopped mid-sentence, glancing toward the piano with raised eyebrows and slight smiles of surprise. Her fingers moved with precision and passion, each note deliberate, each pause meaningful. She played from memory, from feeling, from years of practice that had never been acknowledged. The room seemed to hold its breath as the sound carried through every corner. Even the most critical, most skeptical faces showed a flicker of recognition. Something was happening here that none of them had expected. The notes swelled and then softened, creating waves of emotion. She could see the change in the guests' expressions. Some leaned forward, eyes fixed on her hands as they danced over the keys. Others looked around, uncertain if what they were hearing was real, as if their own ears had been deceived. Laughter from earlier faded from her memory entirely, replaced by a focused intensity that came from the music itself. A waiter nearby accidentally dropped a glass, the sound sharp in the silence, but she didn't miss a beat. Her fingers continued to move, her mind clear and precise. The melody seemed to absorb the distraction, carrying the energy of the room and transforming it into harmony. People's attention shifted entirely to the piano, to the music, to the young woman who was creating it. She remembered the older woman who had encouraged her, the coworker who had believed she could do this. She imagined her standing nearby, smiling, and the thought gave her strength. She played faster, then slower, letting the tempo rise and fall like a story being told. Each note expressed the struggles she had endured, the long hours, the laughter that had once hurt, and the quiet determination that had never left her. Some guests started to whisper to each other. "Is she really playing that? I've never seen anyone like this." The conversation was hushed, respectful now, tinged with awe instead of doubt. They had underestimated her. They were beginning to understand that they were witnessing something rare, something that could not be faked or bought. Her eyes remained on the keys, but she could feel the energy shifting around her. People were leaning closer, listening not just with their ears but with their hearts. She allowed herself a small smile, a quiet acknowledgement that this was the moment her life had been waiting for. For the first time, she was not invisible. She was seen, not for a uniform or a role assigned to her by society, but for the talent she had nurtured in secret. The music grew in intensity, notes flowing faster and more intricate, yet with perfect control. She played a piece that she had written herself, composition that had lived in her mind for years but had never been shared. It told the story of her life, the struggles, the hidden moments of joy, the dreams, and the silent determination. And the audience could feel it. They could see it in the way their expressions softened, how their attention held, how the room had grown still, except for the sound of the piano. A few guests reached for their phones, some discreetly recording the moment. Others simply sat, overwhelmed by the realization that the young woman in front of them, the waitress they had likely ignored for years, was extraordinary. Her fingers danced over the keys, moving with grace and confidence, creating a sound that was both powerful and tender. She played not to impress, not to compete, but because the music demanded to be heard. As the piece reached its climax, the emotion in the room became palpable. She could see tears in a few eyes, subtle nods of admiration, and expressions of surprise, from people who had assumed they were witnessing nothing more than a server doing her job. But she was not a server in that moment. She was an artist, a storyteller, a force of passion and skill that no one could ignore. Finally, the last note faded, lingering in the air like a gentle whisper. The room was silent for a heartbeat. Then slowly, almost tentatively, applause began. It started with a few guests, then more, until the sound filled the restaurant. People were standing now, clapping, cheering, some even whistling. The laughter that had once dismissed her talent was gone, replaced by respect, admiration, and awe. The young woman remained at the piano for a moment, letting the applause wash over her. She breathed deeply, her hands trembling slightly, not from fear, but from the release of everything she had held inside for so long. She looked around at the faces, finally seeing them not as strangers, but as witnesses to her truth. The music had spoken, and they had listened. Some guests approached her, offering congratulations, asking questions, and expressing genuine interest in her talent. The manager smiled broadly, visibly relieved and amazed. She had not only filled the role that was suddenly vacant, but she had transformed the entire evening into something unforgettable. It was a moment that would be remembered, performance that would be talked about long after the night ended, for the first time in years. She felt truly alive in the world around her. The kitchen, the tables, the guests, the piano, they all felt connected in a way that she had never experienced. She had stepped into the light, into recognition, and into the realization that her dreams were not as impossible as she had once believed. When the applause finally settled, she stood slowly, giving a small bow. Some guests were still clapping. Others were smiling, some shaking their heads in disbelief at what they had just witnessed. She felt a quiet joy, a sense of accomplishment that went beyond words. She had taken a risk, faced the doubts, and played from her heart. And in doing so, she had changed the way people saw her hand, perhaps, the way she saw herself. That night, as she finally stepped away from the piano, her mind buzzed with possibilities. Invitations, opportunities, and new connections were already forming in her imagination. But more importantly, she had proven to herself that her talent, her passion, and her dedication could not be hidden any longer. The music had been heard, and the world, for a brief shining moment, had stopped to listen. The music had ended, but the energy it left behind was electric. Guests were still clapping, some rising from their seats, others moving closer to get a better look at the young woman who had just transformed the evening. It was as if time had slowed, allowing everyone to absorb the extraordinary moment they had witnessed. People who had once dismissed her now saw her not as a waitress, but as someone capable of magic with her hands. She stepped back from the piano, her chest still heaving with the adrenaline of performance. Her hands were slightly sore, but it didn't matter. The applause and the stares of astonishment told her she had achieved something far greater than she had imagined. The room was alive with a mix of admiration and surprise. The laughter, the whispers of doubt, the subtle smirks that had greeted her just days before had vanished, replaced with genuine awe. A few guests approached her immediately, offering congratulations and eager questions. One asked if she had formal training. Another wondered where she had performed before. She smiled politely, answering simply, careful to stay humble, yet proud. Her story was simple: years of quiet practice, nights alone with the piano, and a love for music that never faded. The details mattered less than the feeling she had shared through her performance. The manager, who had been pacing nervously throughout the evening, now stood with a wide grin, visibly proud. He had known she had talent, but even he was surprised by the depth of emotion she had brought to the room. Staff whispered excitedly among themselves, acknowledging that they had witnessed something extraordinary. It was a night that would be remembered in the restaurant's history, not just for the music but for the way it had captivated the audience. Some guests began taking pictures and videos discreetly, wanting to capture the moment, not fully realizing that what they were recording could never capture the essence of her performance. The music had done more than entertain. It had touched hearts, shifted perceptions, and reminded everyone present that talent and passion could be found in the most unexpected places. A quiet hush fell over the room as the initial excitement subsided. People began to reflect, exchanging words in low voices. The younger guests, who had arrived with skepticism, looked at her with newfound respect. The older patrons, seasoned and experienced, nodded in appreciation, acknowledging that they had underestimated someone based on her appearance and role. She remained standing near the piano, feeling the weight of the moment. She had been invisible for so long, overlooked by many, yet now she felt seen in a way she had never imagined. The realization brought tears to her eyes, but she quickly blinked them away, not wanting to draw attention to herself. Her journey had been long and quiet, and now the recognition she had dreamed of was finally unfolding before her. As the evening continued, more guests approached her, some shyly, others boldly, asking for advice, encouragement, or simply to compliment her talent. She listened, smiled, and responded, feeling an unfamiliar sense of confidence. Each interaction reinforced the fact that her music had created a bridge between her world and theirs. A bridge built on talent, dedication, and heart. The conversations in the room began to shift. People were talking less about their status or their plans and more about the music, the performance, and the unexpected joy it had brought them. She overheard one guest saying, "I never thought someone like her could move an entire room with just a piano." "It's remarkable," another whispered. "She's extraordinary. Pure talent without pretense." For the first time, she realized that her position as a waitress did not define her. Her job had been a part of her life, a responsibility she had carried with diligence, but it did not limit her abilities. The music had transcended all the assumptions, all the boundaries, and all the expectations. She had created an undeniable truth that could not be ignored. Some of the elite guests began to discuss potential opportunities. Invitations to play at events, offers for music academies, and even suggestions to perform at larger venues started to circulate. She listened quietly, allowing herself to absorb the possibilities without getting ahead of herself. It was overwhelming, yet thrilling, and she felt a deep sense of gratitude for the chance she had taken. Her coworkers watched from a distance, sharing glances of astonishment and pride. They had known her as a quiet, hard-working presence in the restaurant, but now they saw the depth of her talent and the impact it could have. The atmosphere in the staff area was one of excitement and hope, as if her success had inspired them to believe in the possibilities within their own lives. The manager approached her once again, offering a warm smile and a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "You've changed everything tonight," he said softly. "Not just for the guests, but for all of us. You've shown that talent and heart matter more than anything else." She nodded, feeling the weight of his words and the truth they carried. The applause, the recognition, and the excitement around her were not just about a single performance. They were about the validation of years of dedication, the acknowledgement of her passion, and the realization that her dreams were not only possible but tangible. As the evening wound down, she found a quiet corner near the piano, reflecting on the night. The room was gradually emptying, the remaining guests lingering to savor the experience they had been part of. She sat down on the bench, her hands resting lightly on the keys, remembering the nervousness she had felt just hours before. It seemed distant now, replaced by a deep, fulfilling sense of accomplishment. She thought about the future, the opportunities that might arise, and the people she had inspired without even realizing it. The performance had been more than a personal triumph. It had created ripples that reached beyond her own life. The music had connected hearts, changed perceptions, and opened doors she had only dreamed of. The night ended with quiet applause fading into the background, and she finally allowed herself to breathe fully, releasing the tension that had built up. The journey had been long, the path difficult, and the recognition unexpected, but it was now a reality she could embrace. She had stepped into a world that had once seemed inaccessible and had left her mark with nothing more than the power of her music and the courage to act. When the opportunity arose, she left the restaurant. That night, with a sense of wonder and anticipation, the streets outside were quieter now, illuminated by soft streetlights, reflecting the calm after an extraordinary event. Her heart felt light, her mind alive with possibilities, and her soul full of the music that had finally found its audience. The night was not just an ending. It was the beginning of a new chapter, one where she could no longer be overlooked, where her talent could no longer be ignored, and where the world was ready to listen to her story through every note she would play. The next morning, the sun came through her small window in soft golden light, and for the first time in years, she felt a sense of possibility. She moved around her tiny apartment, making tea, noticing the familiar surroundings, but everything felt different. The piano in the corner seemed to glow with new meaning. It had been her companion in private for years, and now it was a symbol of something bigger, proof that her talent could reach the world. Her thoughts kept returning to the night before. She remembered the faces of the guests, their surprise, their admiration, and the way the room had fallen silent as the music carried through it. She remembered the tears she had seen, the nods, the whispered words of awe. It had been more than applause. It had been acknowledgement, understanding, and respect. She felt a warmth in her chest, a joy that was quiet but deep. Even as she worked that morning, her mind wandered back to the performance. She carried trays and wiped tables, but she imagined each note, each pause, each swell of music. It was no longer just a dream in her apartment. It had become reality. And that reality brought with it opportunities she had only dared to imagine. Soon the first message arrived. It was from one of the guests, someone who had connections in the local music scene, inviting her to perform at a small private event. She read it slowly, feeling disbelief and excitement all at once. Then came another message from a different guest, suggesting she consider formal performances or lessons with a respected teacher. Each message made her heart beat faster, filling her with hope that her life could change. The following days were a whirlwind. She balanced work at the restaurant with invitations to perform, each one testing her nerves, but also strengthening her resolve. She practiced more than ever, not just to perfect the music, but to prepare herself to step confidently into this new world. Every note she played reminded her why she had started this journey: the pure love of music, the power to connect, and the courage to share herself fully as she performed at small gatherings. She noticed a transformation in how people treated her. No longer invisible, she was recognized, appreciated, and celebrated. People listened intently, asked questions about her techniques, and wanted to know more about her journey. She smiled, answered humbly, but inside she felt a pride that had nothing to do with money or fame. She had earned respect through her skill, her dedication, the bravery to share her talent when the moment arrived. One afternoon, she received a call from a local music studio. They had heard about her performance and wanted to discuss recording opportunities. She hesitated, overwhelmed by the sudden attention. But then she remembered the encouragement of her coworker and the faith she had found within herself. She agreed, feeling a mixture of excitement and nervousness. It was a new chapter, one she was ready to face. Her life began to change in small but meaningful ways. She still worked at the restaurant because she loved the people there and the familiarity it brought. But now her evenings were often filled with rehearsals, performances, or meetings with mentors. She felt alive in a way she had never experienced before, energized by the realization that her dreams were possible and that one moment of courage had opened countless doors. Friends and coworkers noticed the change in her too. She walked with more confidence, smiled with genuine warmth, and spoke with a quiet authority about her music. They asked about her performances, listened eagerly to her stories, and celebrated her successes. It was a different kind of recognition, the kind that came not from a uniform or assigned role, but from who she truly was and what she could do. Evenings at home became opportunities for growth. She explored new pieces, composed her own melodies, and experimented with different styles. Her piano, once a quiet companion, became a gateway to self-expression and creativity. Each practice session reminded her of how far she had come, from the timid young woman who served tables quietly to someone who could move hearts with her music. The invitations continued to grow. She played at private events, small concerts, and community gatherings. Each performance built her reputation not through flashy displays or connections, but through the undeniable power of her talent and the authenticity of her passion. People began to recognize her in public, often asking for a brief word, a photo, or a chance to hear her play again. She met each request with humility and gratitude, knowing that the real reward was in the music itself. One day, she received an unexpected invitation to perform at a prestigious local venue. The thought was both thrilling and terrifying. She had never imagined herself on a stage of that size, in front of such a large audience. Yet she also knew that the only way to grow was to embrace the challenge. She accepted, feeling a mixture of nerves and excitement. The night of the performance arrived. She walked onto the stage with a calm determination. The lights were bright, the audience large, and the atmosphere electric. She took a deep breath, letting the memory of her first performance at the restaurant guide her. The piano felt familiar under her fingers, and as she began to play, the music flowed naturally, carrying with it all the emotion, passion, and courage she had cultivated over the years. The audience listened intently, completely captivated. The music told a story that words could not express: the journey of struggle, perseverance, and triumph. When the last note faded, the applause was overwhelming, filling the hall with admiration and respect. She smiled, feeling the same profound joy she had felt the first time her music had been truly seen and heard. From that moment on, her life continued to evolve. She balanced work and performance, continued to learn, and embraced opportunities that had once seemed impossible. She remained grounded, never forgetting the quiet hours at home with her old piano, the moments of doubt, and the courage it had taken to step forward. Every note she played was a reminder of where she had come from, and the power of perseverance. Her story became an inspiration to others, a reminder that talent could be hidden in the most unlikely places, and that one moment of courage could change a life. She met aspiring musicians, encouraged them, and shared her experiences, showing that hard work, dedication, and belief in oneself could open doors to unimaginable possibilities. Even years later, she looked back on that night at the restaurant as the turning point, the moment when her life began to change. The laughter that had once dismissed her talent, the doubts that had surrounded her, the quiet moments of practice in her apartment, all led to that single performance that changed everything. She knew that music had given her more than recognition. It had given her a sense of purpose, confidence, and the belief that she could shape her own destiny. And so, she continued to play, not for fame or fortune, but for the love of music, for the joy it brought to herself and others, and for the reminder that sometimes all it takes is one courageous step to turn a quiet dream into a life-changing reality.